I'm Denny Osgood. I'm president of the Dossin Maritime Group. We're absolutely delighted to have you all here tonight. Hey, how many of you are members of the society and or the group? We need to have more hands up. There are sign-up forms out there in the lobby. Anyway, thank you so very much for coming. Lee Murdock has a new song tonight, so he said we don't really have to introduce him. He will introduce himself, and he has a new song called We Shall Always Remember, which has to do with the storm of 1913 and all the lives that were lost. So, Lee Murdock.
Thank you very much. How's everybody doing today? Well, it's a privilege and a pleasure to be here to present folk songs with a maritime flavor. But they are folk songs, folks, which means they are songs that I sing, but they're songs that you sing too, okay? So how many of you folks would feel like just raising your voice in song tonight? Raise your hands. You just joined the society, folks. This is an old song called The Cracked Schooner Moonlight. The chorus goes like this if you don't know it. Hooray for a race down the lakes. Hooray for a race down the lakes. Hooray for a race down the lakes. So whenever those words come out, please join in. The tug towed out the moonlight and dropped us in the gale, with the schooner long before us and the porter on our tail. See your canvas going on to a hearty halyard song. Hooray for a race down the lakes. Oh, the wind's out of the nor'west and a-blowing all the night. You can see them big seas rolling with their bonnets all in white. And up our starboard rail are 100 sail. Hooray for a race down the lakes. Let's hear it now. Hooray for a race down the lakes. Sing it out now. Hooray for a race down the lakes. And up our starboard rail are 100 sail. Hooray for a race down the lakes. To the windward of the law we points our long jib boom, and high atop our main truck goes the old cabin boom. We will never shorten sail till we bury Hurley rail. Hooray for a race down the lakes. Our rainbow's playing forward and a foaming wake is aft. Her deck is all a-slanting beneath her groaning mast. You can see the old man grin as she bullies in the wind. Hooray for a race down the lakes. Hooray for a race down the lakes. Hooray for a race down the lakes. You can see the old man grin as she bullies in the wind. Hooray for a race down the lake. See us walk upon the foremast at our stern, the dimming shore, as we leave the law that damn forth all others by the score. See us gaining to the lead, pay the groaning mast no heed. Hooray for a race down the lakes. We'll skirt the western shore, for ahead is Milwaukee. All day and night we'll drive her till the straits are on our lee. Just let the old ponds roar, as they've often done before. Hooray for a race down the lakes. Hooray for a race down the lakes. Hooray for a race down the lakes. Just let the old ponds roar, as they've often done before. Hooray for a race down the lakes. One more time. Hooray for a race down the lakes. Hooray for a race down the lakes. We will never shorten sail till we bury Hurley rail. Hooray for a race down the lakes. Thank you very, very much. Well, I've had a request for this next song, and I'll sing it. And it's a song that tells an amazing story of tragedy and renewal, maritime history, and the holiday season. In the days when the schooners were hauling lumber from the ports of Michigan to the ports in Wisconsin and Illinois, they were also, in the end of the season, hauling small evergreen trees to be sold in the lots in the southern Great Lakes cities. The most famous of those Christmas ships was captained by a fellow named Herman Schumacher, who brought trees along with his brother for many, many years to the city of Chicago, docked at the Clark Street Bridge more often than not. And unlike all the other captains, he sold the trees directly to the public, so you could step aboard the Christmas ship and pick out your very own special tree. The Great Lakes, as you will discover tonight, are nothing to be trifled with. Most dangerous bodies of water on earth, I think, especially as autumn turns to winter. Undaunted year after year they came, until Captain Herman's luck ran out in 1912, when his vessel, the Rouse Simmons, loaded with 5,500 trees, was lost off of Two Rivers, Wisconsin, in a blinding snowstorm. The loss of that vessel hit Chicagoans hard, but what is amazing is what happened in the aftermath. You know, the aftermath of storms is something that touches everybody, it seems like every day, especially with what happened over the Philippines. But yet, it provides an opportunity for heroes to step forward these tragedies do. And the hero in this story is none other than the captain's wife, Barbara Schuneman. Now, 1913, she could not vote. Most women did not work outside of the household, so she was quite a role model for young women of her age. So I'll sing you this remembrance that I call the Christmas Ship. In the time of my life, that recollection often turns. The snow always fell knee-deep, the ironwood stoves burned, the ever-present distant sound of jingling sleigh bells, combined with the cadence of stock and trade, into a wonderful swell. The creeping of the days never fostered any fear. The hours spent on sleds and skates only slowly disappeared. When a special day arrived, it came but once a year, when to the Clark Street Bridge we'd go, from the dockside we would peer. Oh, Papa, come look, oh, Mama, can you see? I've been waiting for so long for this to come to be. Oh, Papa, come look, oh, Mama, can't you see? Here comes the Christmas ship with all the Christmas trees. Now it was the Christmas ship that brought joy to us here. Those trees were grown up near Manistee and brought on down each year. Rouse Simmons was her name, three-masted schooner was her frame, and the winter wild waters of the lake she always overcame. The set of her captain's face and the smile within his eye electrified that Chicago dock and all its passers-by, but especially us kids, with excitement that was there. We'd bring home a tree from the Christmas ship with holiday in the air. Oh, Papa, come look, oh, Mama, can you see? I've been waiting for so long for this to come to be. Oh, Papa, come look, oh, Mama, can't you see? Here comes the Christmas ship with all the Christmas trees. Then one year it all changed. Well as I can recall, I was in the kitchen playing by the stove as the shadows began to fall. A sun-warm winter day, no clouds crossed the sky, but the air grew damp, a storm rolled in and the snow began to fly. Papa came through the door, a sullen look was in his eyes. The weather's been real rough up north, he told me with a sigh. He said, the Christmas ship is lost. Then he just sat down. As evening darkened the room that night, a shadow cast o'er the town. Oh, Papa, don't look. Oh, Mama, I can't see. I've been waiting for so long. Don't tell this to me. Oh, Papa, don't look. Oh, Mama, can't you see? Where is that Christmas ship with all the Christmas trees? The seasons turned in time through spring, summer, and fall. And with most things my mind forgot that Christmas ship after all. But one early winter's day, like so many times before, I wandered the afternoon hours away, kicking down along the shore. When she came in off the lake, I can still see her now, with the scent of pine and the deep green water gently breaking off her bow, and a lady at midship waving to me there on shore. And she brought delight to the children's faces for 22 years more. Oh, Papa, come look. Oh, Mama, can you see? I've been waiting for so long for this to come to be. Oh, Papa, come look. Oh, Mama, can't you see? Here comes the Christmas ship with all the Christmas trees. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Well, I've been so blessed to meet so many different types of wonderful people that work in the shipping industry, both ashore and on water. And one of those guys I met in Astoria, Oregon, when I was doing folk songs at the Great Lakes out there. And now, I wasn't expecting to have very many people that were really, really excited about the Great Lakes, and I was kind of surprised. Of course, most of those people that were really into the Great Lakes had moved out to Oregon, and they were thinking about their time home. And there was one fellow there named Wes Leach. He was a sailor himself, and he was sitting right in the front row, kind of looking right stern at me. And at the break, I asked him, well, how do you like the show? And he said, Lee, I used to sail on the lakes. I'm all over the world now, but I used to sail on the lakes. And back in 71, 72, 73, what you're talking about, what you're saying about, I know those boats. Many years later, our paths crossed again, and he had written a poem about a vessel that he worked on that was with the Pittsburgh Steamship Company, or known as the Tin Stack Fleet for the color of their funnels. And he told me at the time, you know, sailors pretty much like the vessels that they work on, but it's very special if they have the great name. And he worked aboard this one vessel that had such a pitiful name, he decided to make it into a poem. And it's called Alvesy Dinky with a Tin Stack Fleet. I'll cut to the chase, I ain't ashamed. Loved that old slab, hated her name. Didn't have that Great Lakes get-you-gummy ring like the Mohawk Deer or Seaway Queen. Didn't pack a punch like the Powell Stackhouse. Man, I flat out lusted for the name on that bow. Alvesy Dinky. Read 'em and weep. A coal-burning straight-decker with a tin-stack fleet. I fit her out one spring up in Duluth. She was sailing before the Boston Red Sox had a rookie named Ruth. The old man signed me on, it was his kind of ship, a tin-stack lifer named Zazu Pitts. I was a deck ape with a forward end crowd. My watch partner was the one and only Jake the Bomb, for crying out loud. I was amongst the creme de la creme of the inland seas, the crew of the Alvesy Dinky with a tin-stack fleet. It was in Duluth, two harbors, Calcite and Gary, and all those charming ports down on Lake Erie. We loaded taconite red ore, limestone, and coal, and kept slogging along on our beloved coal-burning ore boat. And in waterfront dives we dreaded the lusty lyrics of the siren song, "Hey there, sailor, what ship are you on?" We may as well have been speaking Greek. We'd say, "Alvasy Dinky with a 10-stack fleet." Us Hanyongs didn't know who Alvasy Dinky was, hadn't a clue. Wishes Mock would have hooked up with Ellie Block or Daniel McCool. She rode out the perfect storm of 1913. We knew she was charmed, but I never saw a dinky tattoo on a decape's arm. She wasn't Chicago Trader, Red Wing, or Yank Canuck. But when other ships sank, the dinky stayed up. She didn't help from Byron or Shelley, Yeats or Keats. Sailed from 1909 to 73, Alvasy Dinky, a coal-burning straight-decker with his 10-stack fleet. Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to get you guys singing along again, I think. This is another traditional song that was collected by Ivan Walton. Ivan Walton was a professor of English in the engineering school at the University of Michigan, and he thought it would be really neat to find some of these old songs that were sung in the 19th century by the tall ship sailors. And he had to find a lot of different types, go through a lot of songs to get them what he was looking for. But he was interviewing a guy named Walter Head in Picton, Ontario, and this song came up. Now, this is a song called The Sailor's Alphabet. Some of you know this song, but if not, I'll teach you the chorus. And the original came from the East Coast in the tall ship era. And in the original it describes the parts of the tall ship or tools on the tall ship or characters on the tall ship. But what was interesting about what Walter's song was that it was about what you would find on a Great Lakes freighter. And I hope you like it. It goes like this. Sailor's Alphabet. A is for anchor, sometimes called a hook. B is for bosun, who's often a crook. C is for captain, a rusty old man. And D is for deck, where the winches are ran. E is for ensign, high up on the spar. F is for fireman, who throws the slice bar. G is for galley, where the cook does his stuff. And H is for hatchway, where one falls enough. So merry, so merry, so merry are we. No mortals on earth are as happy as we. Sing I-derry-o, derry, I-derry down. Give sailor boys grog and there's nothing goes wrong. So the chorus is so merry, so merry, so merry are we. Try that. So merry, so merry, so merry are we. No mortals on earth are as happy as we. No mortals on earth are as happy as we. Sing hi-derry, ho-derry, hi-derry down. Sing hi-derry, ho-derry, hi-derry down. Give sailor boys grog, and there's nothing goes wrong. Give sailor boys grog, and there's nothing goes wrong. I is for iron ore that the ships carry. J is for Jane, we all love but won't marry. K is for keel deep down in the sea. And L is for locks at Sault Ste. Marie. M is for mattress all full of bed bugs. N is for navy beans we eat from our mugs. O is for oiler all greasy and gray. And P is for pumps which he runs night and day. So merry, so merry, so merry are we. No mortals on earth are as happy as we. Sing I-derry, o-derry, I-derry down. Give sailor boys grog and there's nothing goes wrong. U is for quarterdeck, called the fantail. R is for rollers that come o'er the rail. S is for sailor who does his own patches. T is for tarpaulin that covers the hatches. U is for union, the pipe fitters know. V for ventilator, down which the winds blow. W for windlass that pulls up the hook. And X the signature of our scholarly cook. So merry, so merry, so merry are we. No mortals on earth are as happy as we. Sing I dare, oh dare, I dare down. Give sailor boys grog and there's nothing goes wrong. Y is for yells the mate often makes. Z is for zero in winter on the lakes. That's all of the words that I know to this song. If you find more letters, then you can write on. So merry, so merry, so merry are we. No mortals on earth are as happy as we. Sing I dare, oh dare, I dare down. Give sailor boys grog and there's nothing goes wrong. So merry, so merry, so merry are we. No mortals on earth are as happy as we. Sing I dare, oh dare, I dare down. Give sailor boys grog and there's nothing goes wrong. Thank you very much. Well, I was going to save this new song till kind of the very end, but you know, I just kind of feel it's important to have a nice flow to the program, and so I thought, well, maybe this is a good spot for this song. I'll give you a little background on what happened with me. How many of you folks visited the tall ships this summer? Everybody's hand's supposed to be up here. Although we have some long ship fans here, I understand that, but... Well, I was very, very privileged to be a part of many of those events all around the Great Lakes and singing the Great Lakes songs and seeing all of the excitement in the kids' faces and the, both young and old going on board these vessels and learning about the tall ship heritage. And at the end of the season for me, which was culminated in the Battle of Lake Erie, reenactment on Labor Day, I kind of thought, in retrospect, there was one vessel that was missing. And that had been there year after year after year, many of them up on the lakes, and that was the HMS Bounty. On October 29th of last year, many of you saw the footage of her last moments as she sank 90 miles off of Hatteras during Hurricane Sandy with the loss of two lives. And I remember that sickening feeling and that questions that rose up when I was seeing that footage and those pictures and asking those questions. Why? How did this happen? And then I thought, what about 100 years ago? Imagine how people felt. And that's when this song kind of bubbled to the surface. And I was doing a program last night up in Godrich, another memorial service program, and David McAdam said the same thing. Sometimes these songs just kind of happen, and they just kind of come through you, and that's kind of what happened here. And my source for much of this material is Dana Thomas Bowen, and I just decided to kind of go through that on this song. So this is called We Shall Always Remember. We shall always remember when the storms rage o'er the lakes, the strength of heart and purpose that its sailor always takes, and those ashore and waiting for their loved one's fond return, as they search the seething shoreline while at home the fires burn. Think on Argus, then of Cleveland, Captain Gutch and his whole crew, and of the James Carruthers, that was lost without a clue. And the Hydra sank in Huron, she would never sail again. We shall always remember, always remember that great cost in ships and men. There was the Lee Field built in Scotland, lost off Superior's north shore, and the big John A. McGean, Captain A, and 22 more. Charles S. Price turned turtle, and Regina fought the storm. Both crews faced death together, tossed as flotsam on the waves borne. And the Isaac M. Scott hauling coal for the port of Milwaukee, through those towering waves of Huron she sailed for eternity. And Henry B. Smith, she went missing off of Marquette, Michigan. We shall always remember, always remember that great loss in ships and men. There were sailors from the Wexford, washed up lifeless on the shore near Port Huron, the only proof then of her sinking, nothing more. Erie took its toll in Buffalo, lightship 82 at last. Goodbye, Nellie, wrote her captain, ship is breaking up fast. And there were many more ships confounded in that huge November gale. Some were written off as wrecks, while others again would sail. And the strength of heart and purpose that a sailor always takes, we shall always remember. Always remember that great storm, that savage shipping o'er the lakes. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, I think I got to finish up with one more song here. This is a song that my wife Joanne said, Lee, you ought to learn this song. Now, Joanne's done a great job in getting me to sing some songs that I wouldn't even think of. And one of the things that this particular song is it's kind of intimidated because the great Bob Gibson sang this song. How many of you folks remember Bob Gibson? He's a great banjo player and 12-string player. And he sang this song, and so I said, well, I suppose I can do it. And later found out it was written by Pat Daly with help from Shel Silverstein. When I met Pat, I said, you know, you may not realize this, Pat. How many of you have seen Pat's shows, by the way? Okay, so you've been to Put It in Bay, and you can't remember the show, but you thought you were there, right? Well, he has this reputation for a colorful program, let's put it that way. And he got a real big kick out of the fact that there are so many school kids around the Great Lakes region that are singing this song. He was just thrilled. He just thought that was great. And so I'll finish up with this song called the Great Lakes Song. Sweet Mother Michigan, Father Superior, coming down from Mackinac and the Sault Ste. Marie. Blue water Huron rolls down to Lake Erie, falls into Ontario and runs on out to sea. The Great Lakes are a diamond on the hand of North America, a bright shining jewel on that friendship border ring. It's a freshwater highway coming down from Canada, and all along the coastline you can hear the people sing. Sweet Mother Michigan, Father Superior, coming down from Mackinac and the Sault Ste. Marie. Blue water Huron rolls down to Lake Erie, falls into Ontario and runs on out to sea. Hardy are the seamen on the ships that load the iron ore, hauling out of Thunder Bay, bound for Buffalo. And hardy are the fishermen, like their fathers were before they say, bury me at sea when it's my time to go. Sweet Mother Michigan, Father Superior, coming down from Mackinac and the Sault Ste. Marie. Blue water Huron rolls down to Lake Erie, falls into Ontario and runs on out to sea. Down below the quarterdeck, old men mend the fishing nets, while up on the windy bridge, young men cursing to the wind. Up and down the Windsor Straits, the wiser mothers lie awake. They pray Our Lady of the Lake will bring them home again. Singing, Sweet Mother Michigan, Father Superior, coming down from Mackinac and the Sault Ste. Marie. Blue water Huron rolls down to Lake Erie, falls into Ontario and runs on out to sea. Singing, Sweet Mother Michigan, Father Superior, coming down from Mackinac and the Sault Ste. Marie. Blue water Huron rolls down to Lake Erie, falls into Ontario and runs on out to sea. Runs on out to sea. Runs on out to sea. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Lee, thank you. Thank you for not only entertaining us with a wonderful concert, but also the lessons in maritime history and heritage. At this time, we begin our memorial ceremony. Each year on November 10th, the anniversary of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald, we not only recognize and remember the lost crews of the Fitz, but we also search out and remember the lost crews of other boats that have been all but forgotten. This year, however, we could not pick out a boat to remember because on this very day, 100 years ago, over 40 longboats were destroyed and 12 sank with a loss of over 250 mariners on this very day. The reality is that we don't know exactly how many crew members were lost, as crews would get on and get off at different ports, and accurate records were not always kept. So the exact number of lost crews was impossible to know. You will note on a memorial wreath, there is a rose for each of the lost crews. Could we bring the wreath up to the center, Lee? The 12 roses for the 12 lost crews. At this time, I call forth our honor guard to prepare to deliver this memorial wreath to the waters of the Great Lakes in keeping with the maritime tradition of casting flowers on the water. Having the honor of carrying the flag of the United States of America is Henry Hopkins of the U.S. Naval Sea Cadet Corps, Great Lakes Division. Having the honor of presenting the flag of our cherished neighbor to the south, Canada, is Midshipman Caitlin McLaughlin of the Royal Canadian Sea Cadets Repulse Unit of Sarnia, Ontario. I call Commander Jeff Ogden, U.S. Coast Guard, Sector Detroit. I call Captain Sandy Ryersey, representing the Canadian Coast Guard, Search and Rescue Division, Amherstburg, Ontario. I call James Weekly, President of the Lake Carriers Association. I call Patrick Baird, President of the International Shipmasters Association, Detroit Lodge 7. I call John Jamian, Executive Director, Detroit Wayne County, Port of Detroit. I call Peter Berry, Harbor Master, Port of Windsor. I call Constable Wally Silver, Royal Canadian Mounted Police. I call Captain William Scott, Captain Marine Division, Ontario Provincial Police Department. I call Captain Catherine McGraw, Mariners Church of Detroit. I would normally be calling Father Russ Kohler from the chaplain of the Apostleship of the Sea from Most Holy Trinity Church. However, he just got out of the hospital this evening. We miss him. He's been a participant for years. I call Reverend Paul Woolley, St. Paul's Anglican Church of Courtright, Ontario. I call Chief Petty Officer Russ Meadus, U.S. Navy Buglers across America. While I can't call him forward, I would like to give special recognition to Corporal John Chafe of the Royal Canadian Armored Corps Windsor Regiment. From out on the river, you will hear him echo our playing of the taps with his playing of Canada's Most Beautiful Last Post. He's done that for a couple years. And representing our next generation of professional mariners are the cadets of the Great Lakes Maritime Academy, Traverse City. Reverend Moley, would you come forward and give a blessing for our memorial wreath?
Eternal Lord God, who alone spreads out the heavens and who rules the raging of the seas, we ask you to bless, consecrate, and set apart this honor wreath of roses. May it symbolize the bittersweet feelings of grief and pain, of our remembering with the hope we have of eternal life. In the same way that a beautiful rose is covered with thorns. When this wreath is set adrift upon the waters, may it carry our prayers so that they can reach out to all who have lost their lives in the Great Lakes and all the waterways of this continent. May they rest in peace in the sure and certain knowledge that they will never be forgotten Amen.
Captain McGraw, would you give a recognition to those crews lost in the Great Storm of 1913? And would you follow that by a recognition of our honor flotilla coming to escort this wreath to the waters of the Great Lakes?
On Lake Superior, the Canadian steamer Leafield, Charles Baker, master, lost with a crew of 18. The United States steamer Henry B. Smith, James Owen, master, lost with a crew of 25. Stranded United States steamer Nottingham lost 3 crew in a rescue attempt. On Lake Michigan, the United States barge Plymouth, Axel Larson, master, lost with a crew of 7. On Lake Huron, the United States steamer Argus, Paul Getch, master, lost with a crew of 28. Canadian steamer James Carruthers, William H. Wright, master, lost with a crew of 22. The United States steamer Hydrus, John H. Lowe, master, lost with a crew of 25. The United States steamer John A. McGeehan, Chauncey 9, master, lost with a crew of 28. The United States steamer Charles S. Price, William A. Black, master, lost with a crew of 28. The Canadian steamer Regina, Edward H. McConkie, master, lost with a crew of 20. The United States steamer Isaac M. Scott, Captain A. MacArthur, lost with a crew of 28. The Canadian steamer Wexford, Bruce Cameron, master, lost with a crew of about 20. On Lake Erie, the United States lightship LV-82 out of Buffalo, Hugh Williams, master, lost a crew of 6. I now request that the Honor Guard prepare to deliver this honor wreath to the Honor Flotilla at the river's edge in remembrance of all lost mariners. The Honor Flotilla is now coming down the Detroit River and is led by Detroit Fireboat Curtis Randolph and is followed by the Ontario Police Department's Julianne Fantino, then the U.S. mailboat J.W. Westcott, which is followed by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police boat Shipwriter Titan, followed by the Canadian Coast Guard vessel Cape Lambton.
remembering the mariners who died at sea is just as important as praying for those who are forging the future and living the present. We may not know each by name, might not know them for what they have done to make our countries in North America a wonderful place to live with unlimited opportunities. Lord, we pray for all who have lost their lives in storms, calamities, and mishaps upon the waters. May your angels guide their souls from their rest in the deep to peaceful bliss in highest heaven. Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord, and let light perpetual shine upon them. May the souls of the faithful departed, through the mercy of Almighty God, forever rest in peace. Amen.
Okay, I think at this time we'd like to continue our program. I would like to present a commercial, and that is that a week from yesterday, on Saturday, November 19th, the Dossin Museum Group holds a Marine Mart up at the Grosse Pointe War Memorial. Starts at 10 o'clock in the morning, and there will be about 35 vendors that have all nautical related materials. Gentlemen, this is a great place to come and buy your sweetheart something for Christmas. That's next Saturday up at the Grosse Pointe War Memorial. Last year, we gave special recognition of Captain Donald Erickson, a special friend of the Dossin Museum, the former captain of the ship that the pilot house up there came off of, the William Clay Ford. This past year, we lost another special mariner and friend of the Dossin Museum and one of Captain Erickson's best friend, Captain Bill Hoy. Probably more than half the people in this room knew Bill, primarily as the owner-operator of Gaelic Tug Company. However, he reached out much further than that, as in fact everybody in this room has benefited from Captain William Hoy's commitment to Detroit and the Great Lakes heritage. Not only was he very generous to the Dossin Museum and the Great Lakes Maritime Institute with his time, his equipment, and his efforts, he was greatly concerned that the people of Detroit, especially the school-age children, had very little access to experience the marvels and potentials of the Detroit River and the Great Lakes waterways. With that concern in mind, he went and purchased the Diamond Bell touring boat and ran it on a very regular basis at a very regular low price for a ticket. So now a father could afford to take his whole family out and experience a day on the river. Later, the Diamond Jack and the Diamond Queen were added to the fleet. So while Captain William Hoy was a very colorful Irishman in word and deed, he was a true friend of Detroit and the Great Lakes. Are there any members of Captain Bill Hoy's family present? I know they have a busy time this time of the year. Is Paul Jagonar out there? All right. At this point, Joel, I'd like you to come forward, and would you take these roses out to the river and give them our blessing? In fact, I will take them out, and I would like you to introduce our next speaker. I will. And while I'm taking these roses out, would everybody give a special blessing as well?
And we'll remember Bill Hoy with a moment of silence, please. And back to the fun. And tonight, the fun and the instruction is being provided by Michael Schumacher, who, like Lee, lives on the other side of Lake Michigan, so he's come quite a way for this. He's written 12 books, including The Mighty Fitz, The Sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald, and The Wreck of the Carl D., about the Carl D. Bradley disaster, as well as 25 documentaries on Great Lakes shipwrecks and lighthouses. He's also authored, and this was part of the fun part because I'm an old Little Abner fan. He either authored or co-authored biographies of cartoonist Al Capp, Little Abner fame, poet Allen Ginsberg, guitarist and composer Eric Clapton, folk music legend Phil Ochs, and filmmaker Francis Ford Coppola. Quite a spectrum of people there. Today, November 10th, is the official release date of his latest volume, November Fury, the Deadly Great Lakes Hurricane of 1913. We are honored that Michael is both here and kicking off this book here at the Dossin Museum this evening as we commemorate the loss of that storm and pay tribute to the men lost over the last 3 days, over a 3-day period, 1 century ago tonight. Help me welcome to the Dossin Great Lakes Museum, Michael Schumacher.
I got to tell you, everybody hear me? I got to tell you, after all that out there, this all seems pretty anticlimactic to me. Here we are paying respects to a couple of anniversaries, the Edmund Fitzgerald and this storm. And it's the 100-year anniversary of the storm, so it's, one of those big noteworthy events. And for those of you that aren't familiar, and we have the first, well, I'll leave it there, what the hell. 100 years ago, from November 7th to November 10th, a freshwater hurricane tore through the Great Lakes, visiting first Lake Superior in Michigan, before dropping down to torment the lower lakes, most notably Lake Huron. Before it was over, dozens of vessels had been sunk, grounded, or seriously damaged. More than 250 men and women working on the boats had lost their lives. Shorelines had been resculpted, cities buried in snow. The lakes have seen a number of historically memorable storms, including what's known as the Mataafa storm on Lake Superior in 1905, the Armistice Day storm of 1940, and the storms that brought down the Carl Bradley in 1958 and the Daniel J. Morrell in 1966, and of course the Edmund Fitzgerald storm of 1975. But as devastating as these storms were, none could even approach the storm of 1913 for sheer devastation and loss of human life. I'm writing this down, so I'm actually supposed to be moving this thing along. I can't begin to address something of this magnitude in a brief period of time that I have here this evening, for all the tales of great seamanship, courageous rescues, and survival involving intense battles against the forces of nature. I can only talk about a handful. And since this is a mariner's remembrance, I'd like to tell a few stories about some of the individuals, now long gone, who found themselves facing the ultimate of nature's fury. But before I do, just a word or two about the storm itself. November, as we know, can be the roughest and most unpredictable month in the Great Lakes shipping calendar, and all the major storms that I just mentioned had occurred in November. The 1913 storm was mainly the result of three separate fronts, two very strong and one a bit weaker, merging to create a monstrous weather event. Although it posted storm warnings through the Great Lakes region, the U.S. Weather Bureau simply could not keep up with the rapidly changing conditions of this particular storm. Gale force winds had been expected. This storm brought hurricane force winds, as well as gale force winds. And these high velocity winds were sustained for unprecedented periods of time. In addition, the wind direction shifted quickly and unpredictably. Captains charting courses to keep their vessels in the lee of the storm suddenly found themselves, after a wind shift, in the teeth of the worst sailing conditions they'd ever experienced. Waves on the lake were enormous, many the height of 2- and 3-story buildings, with rogue waves being even higher. This storm, as we're about to see, tested the abilities of seasoned, highly skilled captains and crews. One such captain was John Wesley Dossin, master of the L.C. Waldo, pictured here, a 400 loaded with iron ore, vessel that left the docks at Two Harbors, Minnesota, before storm warnings had even been posted. At 65, Dossin had lived a long, eventful life. He had been just 15 years old when he enlisted in the Union Army during the Civil War, and he had served under William Tecumseh Sherman during the legendary general's march to the sea. Dossin had begun his sea career at age 19, and he rose quickly through the ranks. He served as the first mate on several vessels before becoming a master of his first boat at 27. The Waldo was special, though, to Dossin, because it wasn't just an issue of command. Dossin had supervised the Waldo's construction. In 1896, he was part owner of the freighter, and he'd been the Waldo's only master. On his 1913 final voyage, the early portion went fairly smoothly. Winds were fresh out of the southwest, which presented a little problem as the Waldo moved across Lake Superior on a southeastern course, but the winds began to intensify. And with dropping temperatures, blizzard snow conditions, everything changed. The Waldo was laboring, and Dossin felt ship and crew might be better off if he headed to the Keweenaw Peninsula, dropped anchor, and waited out the storm. Nature had other plans. In the middle of the evening, the Waldo was hit by a massive wave. It was estimated possibly even as high as 70 feet. that if you look at the pilot house, and this has always boggled my mind, to be honest with you. It just, the wave went over the top of the boat and just completely devastated the pilot house. Dossin and his first mate and his wheelsman were lucky to escape with their lives. Dossin turned around and says, "My God, Mr. Feger, here comes the big one." And they dove down the stairwell to get out of there. Two of them got away. The wheelsman was tossed like a rag doll onto the deck of the boat. Fortunately, he wasn't horribly injured. But the boat itself, the front, the pilot, the steering, everything was done. What are we going to do? Dossin was a pretty good commander. They had an auxiliary wheel at the back of the boat. So he just walked to the auxiliary wheel with a stool and a compass and a lantern. And he stood out there and tried to steer this boat. And he was doing pretty good. He was coming pretty close to the Keweenaw Peninsula when his rudder gave out. Now he can't steer. He's completely at the mercy of the storm. And you can imagine what happened. Well, he was going to get to the Keweenaw Peninsula whether he liked it or not. And he did. The boat ran aground and snapped across the back, the stern end of it sagging and threatening to drag the boat back into deep water. It was a very, very precarious position. Dossin, though, never lost his cool through it all. He made sure that everyone made it to the front of the boat, which created kind of a funny story as far as I was concerned, because they had a couple of the wives were in the back of the boat, and they didn't want to make that move. They had to jump over the crack in the ship and all this. They thought they'd be safe back there. So they literally had to carry them struggling all the way across the deck of the ship in this mighty storm, because the water was still, all righty then, the water was still breaking over. I have no idea what I just did. This, folks, you should know, is my first PowerPoint presentation. You got it? How are we doing so far? Anyway, I've got to move this thing along. Before long, this boat was starting to ice up, and it was more dangerous than ever. Now, he being Dossin, checked to make sure everybody's okay, and then directed an interesting, I thought, exercise. They built a bathtub. They tore out the bathtub in his quarters and built fire in that bathtub. They took fire buckets and made a chimney so that they could stay warm in a windlass room, which was pretty ingenious, I thought, on their part. But nevertheless, they were stuck. They weren't anywhere near a shipping lane, so they had no idea if anybody's going to find them. And fortunately for everyone, someone did. The Stevenson was a ship heading down the lake. It wasn't carrying anything, so it was taking a pretty good battering in this storm. But the captain of the ship, Captain W.C. Mosher, who was a real hero in this story, I think, was awakened from a sleep. The first mate said, "You got to see this. There's somebody stuck out there." And he goes and he looks, and here's, sure enough, here's the Waldo. So he says, "Let's move in for a closer look." Now, wait a minute, folks. This thing's grounded, okay? This boat, the Stevenson, isn't small. So how far are you going to move in? Well, he moved in as close as he possibly could, and he said, "It looks like nobody's on deck or on board. It looks like it's been abandoned." When all of a sudden, a distress flag comes up the mast of the Waldo. So they know somebody's alive. And it was at this point, I mean, it's really, here's what the Waldo was looking like. This is the actual picture of the Waldo, iced over, hung up. It looks like it's floating, doesn't it? But it's hung up. It's not going anywhere. It's broken in the back. And now what are we going to do? So Mosher, who doesn't have to do a thing, technically, he feels he has to, though. These are fellow sailors. The storm is still raging. He sends his first mate on a boat, a little, like, rowboat. I'm thinking, this takes some guts. He sends him to shore to try to contact the Eagle Harbor Life-Saving Station. Well, as it turns out, the Eagle Harbor Life-Saving Station had problems of its own. Its boats had been smashed to smithereens, one of them, and another one was too small. They tried to take it out, and they couldn't even get it out onto the water. So they brought it back, and they figured we better work on this big boat that's been smashed up. Meanwhile, these people are encased in ice. They have no food. They managed to get a couple of cans of food. When they were rushing to the back, somebody had the presence of mind to grab a couple of cans of food, which fed the crew not at all to speak of. But the next morning, he hasn't heard, Mosher that is, on the Stevenson, hasn't heard from anybody yet. And he's starting to get a little tense. What are we going to do about this Waldo? So he sends the second mate ashore in a boat to look. And the idea being, if you don't get them at Eagle Harbor, get them at the Portage Lake Life-Saving Station. So you've got two. Now, the problem with the Portage Life-Saving Station is it's 60 miles away. Now, how are we going to get people there? It's 60 miles by water, incidentally. And sure enough, they sent somebody out, and they couldn't get out either. It was a mess. Now, what do we got a bigger boat. But how are we going to do this? How are we going to get that boat out there? And it created this. The thing that I found amazing about it was the persistence. You know, Dossin has got his people all rallied around this crazy fire in the windlass room. He's trying to keep their spirits up. And meanwhile, out, Mosher he went out one day just to see for himself the boat, but he wanted them to know, we haven't forgotten you. And eventually, amazingly, the Eagle Harbor and both life-saving stations were able to get a boat out. Oh, wrong one. Well, they were able to get a boat out. Each one of them got one. And in the middle of the night, they arrived. I mean, it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, if memory serves. It was in the middle of the night, in any event. And they find what looks like a deserted, they didn't even know, there was no way of knowing if anybody was still alive on this boat. But sure enough, somebody yells out, ahoy. Why they didn't yell something else? I guess that's what sailors yell out. I don't know. But they yelled out, they gave him an ahoy, and sure enough, they couldn't even get out. They had to cut their way out, chop their way out with axes. It was so intense. There was so much ice on this thing. Yet Dossin comes out, and in probably the greatest understatement of his life, said, well, that was a close one. That was about as bad as I've ever seen. Probably so. But it's noteworthy, when you talk about heroes, and we bandy that word around quite a bit these days, the people from these life-saving stations risked a lot to get out to them, a lot. The one station, the Harbor Beach station, it was 14 hours from getting to that station to getting to the Waldo to help them out. 14 hours in incredible conditions. So these people were real heroes, and they were recognized as such. The Department of the Treasury awarded both stations gold medals for their going out and assisting these men. And Dossin retired from the lakes The Waldo eventually was refloated. So, you know, it all had a happy ending in the middle of a very tense storm. Another boat, I want to keep moving this thing along. One of my favorite stories in this book is a story about a lady named Sadie Black. She was the second cook on a boat called the Hannah. And she came to exemplify to me some of the best that you can see in very, very difficult times. The Hannah was a 480-footer, so it's a good-sized boat, and it left Lorain, Ohio, with over 9,000 tons of coal that was meant for Fort William, Ontario. And they are going up Huron the day that the storm really hit Lake Huron. And they got just the living hell battered out of them in every respect imaginable. They barely made it through one bad beating, and their captain, a guy named William Hagan, this is a guy with 25 years experience. He knows what he's doing out there, yet he and his first mate, a guy named Charles Mayberry, or his first engineer, I'm sorry, they were working like crazy to orchestrate this thing's just not sinking on them at some point or another. The stern was being thrown out of the water by the waves, so that you had the overspin of the screws, and when it hit the water again, it would send a big shudder through the boat. These guys are carefully working to try to keep this to a minimum. Incredible seamanship throughout, and they made it through one really bad episode, and then they got socked with the worst. They were sailing blind into the storm. They had no idea even where they were. And this storm kicked up another time. And, I mean, the severity of it, it was severe all the way through, but really kicked up. And they thought they were going to split. They really thought they were going to break in half. And the pounding it took, you know, was such that they weren't sure they were going to make it. And they had no idea where they were. And then all of a sudden, this is what they see. Oh, no, they didn't. They didn't see that. They didn't see the Waldo. Well, that's what they saw. God, if they saw the Waldo, I really got this book screwed up. But this is the Port Austin Reef Lighthouse. And while you might think that would have been a comforting thing to them, that lighthouse was out there in the middle of nowhere, as you can see, for a reason. There's a reef there. And when it hit, this is another, it looks like it's in the water. There it is, out on the reef, in the middle of nowhere, and it's going to take a pounding from the storm. Now, most mariners will tell you this is pretty scary stuff, and this is where Sadie Black comes in. They're getting just pounded to death, and she gets swept literally off her feet. She's a kind of a little woman. She gets swept off of her feet from her quarters, bowled down the corridor of the ship, down a flight of stairs, down another corridor from the flooding of the water, and she's deposited right at the feet of Charles Mayberry, the first mate, or first engineer. It's like, what the hell's going on here? You know, but she was hurt, but not seriously. Now, this is the thing that, to me, defines, you know, heroism or heroism. Now, as we all know, women can be much, much stronger than men, certainly under duress. The men were really in bad shape on this boat. And I'm not joking. They were really in bad shape. She acted like part cheerleader. She acted as part cook, which she was. She stood in bare feet in icy water from Lake Huron. You know how cold this water is, waist deep, until they got help a couple days later. And at that point, she was suffering from the initial onset of hypothermia. They weren't even sure she was going to make it from the life-saving boat to, oh, and I should show you some of these, geez. Again, here's some of the damage, just to give you an idea of what some of the damage that was done to the boat. I meant to show that that's my personal favorite. The stack sitting right on the deck, that happens all the time. Look on that guy's face. But and this is the rescue crew that came out to get them. And when they got there, no, we won't do that one. When they got there, the thing that was amazing to me was Sadie Black wouldn't get on the boat. She wanted to wait. She said, I'm not taking any woman's privileges here. I'll wait. And we go according to rank. I'm one of the last. And here she is. They thought she was going to die. I'm not kidding you. They thought she was going to die. And this is one of the things that I wanted to show was the damage. That was the Port Bark light saving station docks. This is what you're looking at in this storm. And these people are going out to rescue in boats like this on seas that were unbelievable. And Sadie Black refused to leave the boat. Finally, they were able to get her off the boat. And I should add that she didn't sail again after all this. But to me, you know, that's an act of extraordinary courage to stand down there in the midst of all this and deal with it. And it's one of the things I think that puts a human face on a storm. You know, it's real easy to sit there and look at, and it's funny because with this book, that's what everybody asks me about. I've done a number of interviews now for this, and that's what everybody wants to know about the storm. They don't want to know about the people. I'm like, well, some of these people are kind of interesting, you know. But there were, you know, or they remember the bad part. The bodies washing up on beach, the wreckage washing up on beach, especially on the Canadian side. They started coming up, and you realized the incredible human toll that was being paid here for this particular storm. And one such boat was this one, floating upside down. That's just a portion of the boat out of the water, kind of a safety hazard, I imagine. But they didn't know what it was. What is this boat? And now, there were all these boats that have gone missing. Nobody knows what's going on. Families don't know what's going on. They're worried to death. Cleveland, which was the sort of the epicenter of shipping back in those days, had been buried in snow, and they were isolated. They couldn't even, they had no phones, anything. It was a mess. So nobody knew what boats were down, what crew people were missing, what was going on, and this shows up. And let the festivities begin. The papers were full of speculation. It just became known as the mystery ship. Now we'll get back to that in a minute. One of the groups, or one of the ships that they thought it might be was the Charles Price. And there's an interesting story, another one of these strange human stories that come out of this. The Price's second or first assistant engineer was a guy named Milton Smith. And back when they were loading the Price, when the weather was good, nothing had happened yet, Smith says he wants out. He goes to his captain, Captain William Black, and says, I want out. That's it. He says, what's the matter? He says, I don't know. I just don't feel good about this at all. And so he is resigning his position. Now, he'd been on the lakes for a long time. He was married. He had 6 kids. And now all of a sudden he's walking away on a premonition. Sailors get those. I mean, you hear about it. But this was pretty strange because there was no indication that anything really horrible was going to happen. Some rough weather had been predicted, but it wasn't what it turned out to be. They didn't know it was going to be this bad. So he goes and he talks to a couple of his friends, a guy named Ars McIntosh, who was a good buddy of his. And ours, you know, he's 23 years old. He wanted to get off that boat in the worst way himself. He said, if you're getting off, I'm getting off. They were from the same town. Except he needed a procedure. His eyes were bad, and he needed a procedure, and he needed to work those last 2 runs of the year and get his bonus so he could afford this stuff. And he said, man, I wish I was going with you. He talked to his chief engineer, a man he liked very much, a guy named John Groundwater, a guy who by all indications was just an outstanding seaman. And Groundwater tried to talk him into it. He says, nope, I'm not doing it. Now, getting back to the mystery ship. Days pass. Nothing's happened. But bodies are still washing on shore. And they all have different kinds of life jackets on. It could have been any number of boats. The Detroit paper, there's another picture of the boat if you can see it there. It's sitting out in the middle of nowhere, just sticking out of the water. You can see where the biggest mystery in the history of the Great Lakes disasters, they called it. And it was, I mean, nobody knew. And the problem was, is the reason it was still floating was that just that tiny portion hadn't filled with water. And it was gonna. And when it did, it was gonna sink, and they would never know what boat that was. How could they? They didn't have scuba diving and stuff in those days in 1913. That boat went down, and it was all over. You would never know. And with all these boats missing and all these families worried, what are we going to do? Well, they started speculating. They thought, they were pretty sure that it was the Regina. And then they finally sort of concluded, yes, it is, in fact, the Regina. There was just one slight problem. The bottoms of the boats were painted differently. This one, I believe, was black, and the Regina was green. But they still wanted to believe it was something like that, because the Regina had gone missing. You couldn't even tell how big the boat was from what was sticking out of the water. And the Regina wasn't a real big boat. It was 249 feet. It was a package freighter. And it was a tough little customer. It delivered to ports all around the lakes, the packaged goods mostly. And on its last journey, their guy, McConkey, the Captain McConkey, he was another one of these guys who was real good early. He had his own boat early, and now he was 34. He had 2 daughters, and a wife and 2 daughters. And he had gone missing. Nobody knew where he was. He hadn't reported. They were thinking, well, this might have been it for the Regina, and which is interesting because it was built overseas. It was built to take a tremendous. When I say overseas, you know, in the British Isles, supposed to take a pounding. It was supposed to take it, and this particular one was really loaded. That was one of the reasons people thought something might have happened, that McConkey might have overdone it a little bit, in the respect that let me see. I think I have a picture. Yeah, there it is. That's the Regina. You can see it's kind of like a compact straight decker. Doesn't have as much in the middle, but everything else looks like a straight decker, doesn't it? And it was loaded. It was loaded with all sorts of stuff because his job was to deliver for the winter, all these winter supplies to people around, I'm going to mess this up. I want to say it was Saginaw Bay. But he didn't show up. He didn't make it. And so people started to assume that it was the Regina. And unfortunately, there was no proof that the mystery ship was the Regina until they got somebody to ID it. they have a contest in the newspaper. Whoever identifies this boat will get, a reward. So these people wanted to do it, but the water was way, way too rough. A newspaper went out, and a publicity stunt, and one of the reporters was out there talking to this diver, and he's going, I'm not letting you in that water. Because, again, this wasn't what you're talking about today. There were no aqua lungs or any of this business. It was pretty dangerous. But they were so worried that they weren't going to be able to identify this boat, and then what? Boats went missing. They went missing all over the place in this storm. Some have never been found. But I'm going to give you just the bottom line on the Regina. It didn't make it, and the Great Lakes artist Robert McGreevy drew this picture of the boat as it is today. You could see the beating and the horrible mess that it took in its last hours. And it was very moving to me because I started thinking about it. McConkey, the captain, tells his guys to abandon ship, and they do. All sorts of, I think virtually the entire crew of the Regina was recovered on shore, washed up dead. And he went down a flight of stairs. He went to his quarters. He had turned off all the power to the boat. It had grounded at one point. It was taking on water. It was just a matter of time. He knew there was no point. He was going to go down with his ship. I'm thinking about that, what that must be. You got a wife at home. You got two little kids, age 2 and 7, I guess it was. 2 little daughters. You go down and you sit down in your office or in your room, and you wait for the worst to happen. What must run through your mind on something like that? I mean, I was really trying to think about that. What must it be like when you know with certainty you are going to die and soon? And in fact, you've chosen to die this way. It's cold. There's no power in there. So he's in this freezing room knowing that he's going to die. And I was really, really kind of moved by just the thought of what must have passed through this man's mind and how unbelievable it was that he sat there and did it. This is his, I lean on the thing once again, but this is his watch, which was recovered. He washed up on shore. It was found in August of 1914, so it was over, it was nearly a year later. But you wonder, what do you tell the man's, they gave this watch to his widow. That's got to be something, and it brought, for me, some of this stuff brings it into the focus for me, the human part of it. The Regina, you saw the wreckage, and I talked to a couple of people today that have actually dove that wreck. It's not in real deep water. And it just is such a sad story. At desperate moments at the end, where he literally opened the whistle and it whistled for an hour, hoping that somebody would hear his distress whistle and help him. People did hear it. They just couldn't do anything. So he was out there trapped. He had dropped an anchor. That boat was going nowhere other than down to the bottom of Lake Huron. So that was something to me. It hit me. Now, meanwhile, while all of this discussion about the Regina is going on, our guy, Milton Smith, has been asked to go down to Goderich because a bunch of people from the Charles Price had washed ashore, and they needed somebody that could ID him. What a job. Here's a guy who jumped off the boat because he had a bad premonition. Now he's going to find out just how right he was. He goes. He sees some of the people, his friend, Ars McIntosh, identifies them. The cook, who was still wearing his apron, all of his white stuff, they found him, and he identified him. But the one that was interesting was John Groundwater, his chief engineer. because he was wearing a Regina life ring. Now, what is a guy from the Price doing wearing a Regina life ring? Another mystery. And it was one of those things that just started to build up. The press was having a field day with it because stuff was washing up. This is the picture of the Price. The stuff was washing up onto the shore. Bodies were, and here's the Hydrus lifeboat that washed up the shore. And here, even more interesting to me, is the Argus. They found 4 people in that lifeboat. They had literally gotten off, including the captain of the boat, Getch. He'd gotten off the boat. They got in the boat, and one of his last great gestures, there was 3 men and a woman. Getch gave his life jacket to the woman on board because she didn't have one. None of them made it. They all died out on the lakes. We're on Lake Huron. And so this stuff is coming up. Here's another one. Look at all the different, one says Wexford, one says Carruthers. All of this stuff is washing up, and it's a look at tremendous loss, because now we know these boats are down, and nobody has made it to shore safely. And it should be noted, nobody ever did. Every single boat that sank was all hands lost. Every single one. But Smith is identifying these people. He sees the first chief engineer, groundwater, and now they're starting to rethink what it is. And the diver goes down. And sure enough, he says he was diving in this murky water. He couldn't see a thing. And he was way up. It was only inches visibility. And he's reading the name Price upside down on the boat. And so they finally had an identification, and they could notify the families of the people that had perished on the boat. And the diver collected his reward. But it's, to me, and in the middle of all this, I should note, incidentally, there was some humor in the middle of all this. There's a guy named John Thompson who worked on the Carruthers. Where you're looking at the Carruthers life jackets right over there. Obviously, the boat went down. They knew the boat went down. And so this guy, Thompson's sister, is not watching the news, what am I saying? She's reading the news in a newspaper, and they say they found all these bodies. Bodies were starting to wash up. What are we going to do? She gets a hold of her father, and she says, my God, I think they found John. And so he travels to Goderich to identify his son. He goes in, and there's his son laid out. He had certain very, very distinguishing features. John Thompson had JT tattooed on his left arm, for example. He was missing 3 teeth. He had very, very unique scars on his nose and on one of his legs. And his father says, that's the guy, that's my son. I have to bring him home. So he does. He takes him home, and they have him, as they did very often in those days, laid out in the home, the living room of the home. And the neighbors are coming by. And they're having the funeral. And there's a knock on the door. And Thomas Thompson goes to the door and opens it, and there's his son John standing there. He passes out. Now his wife goes to the door because something obviously upset her husband a great deal. She sees him and she passes out. Well, they bring everybody around, and the thing that was interesting, kind of humorous about it, was they asked him, why didn't you tell us what was going on? Because he says, I thought I'd surprise you. All righty then. Yeah, I guess mission accomplished. But in Goderich, on a more serious note, they sent the body back. I should note, because this is going to figure into what I'm about to tell you. They sent the body back to Goderich, and they had 4 people total that were not claimed. Nobody knew who they were, and they don't know to this day who they were. 4 people. So what are we going to do? So what they did, and this is a very moving thing, I love this picture of the funeral procession. The whole town held a funeral for the people that were lost in the Great Storm of 1913. The 4 unidentified people. And the streets were lined with people. It was a very solemn ceremony, in their own way, very much like what we saw here this evening, where and people dropped in line behind and followed her to the cemetery. And they put them in individual graves. But then somebody had the idea that they were all in the same storm, all under the same conditions. And they put them in this. It says sailors. Memory of unidentified seamen lost in the Great Lakes disaster of November 1913. And that's how it sits to this day. I think it's a wonderful memorial. But there were funeral services and so forth all over, and they never did. Some people were just assumed dead. They never turned up. Some boats were never found. And that makes sense, incidentally, for what it's worth. Think about it. Back in those days, who was going to go down to find them? You know, they went missing until years later when explorers started to look for them when they could. They could go down certain depths, and they had things like sonar side scans and so forth, where they could locate these things. They went down, they visited the wreckage and found out where these boats were, but there's still boats missing. Now, cut to it. Am I okay? Okay. I'm on a strict time limit. I got to define Europe in 5 sentences here. No, seriously though, I have my book done. I got it turned in. It's been edited. It's been typeset. And then they find a boat. Now, the Henry B. Smith, a monstrous boat. And it's an interesting, crazy story. This was the one that really kind of grabbed people. Jimmy Owen, and we're going to show Jimmy, there's the Smith, but there's Jimmy Owen he would be the far right of this photo. Little guy. He was known as a real fun sort of guy. They called him Laughing Jimmy Owen. They called him Dancing Jimmy Owen because he loved to go ballroom dancing if his boat was in on a weekend. And very, very loved by his men, but not by his company. Because it had been a rough year, 1913, for him. He had come in late on several occasions. It was determined it wasn't his fault per se, but they don't care about fault. You're coming in late. Now Owen calls him and says, boy, things are really looking bad out there on the lakes, or he wires them. He says, I'm thinking of staying in. They told him, you stay in, you look for work elsewhere next year. So Jimmy Owen took his boat, and he was in a hurry. Other boats, captains commented on this after the fact. There was a little lull in the storm, and he pulls out into the lake. His people hadn't even battened down all the hatches. They were out there on the deck, battening down hatches as he went out. The last anybody heard from Jimmy Owen was he sent a wire telling his bosses, I'm on my way. He didn't make it far. He was barely he wasn't even out of sight. He was barely up the lake when tremendous blizzard conditions started back up on the lakes. And the last thing anybody saw was him making a desperate attempt, what they think was to go to the Keweenaw Peninsula for shelter. He didn't make it. He disappeared. He was never heard from again. Wreckage did come on shore, so they knew that, and I believe one body. I think they found one body. And so they knew it was down, but they never knew where until my poor book was delivered and forth. And well, the guys that found it are great guys. I really enjoyed meeting them and talking to them. And the discovery of the boat, it puts a kind of a little exclamation point to the end of this storm story, because these guys were regular guys. They didn't have any money. They built their own sonar side scan. They built it themselves. They built their own camera for exploring underwater. And Jerry Eliason, the sort of commander of this search, his wife designed a computer program, and everything came together. Now, I say in the book, and I believe this is true, incidentally, ships will tell you when they're ready to be found. That's an old superstition that they have, and I believe it's true. When the time comes, they'll find it. The Wexford was like hiding in plain sight for many years. They found it. And that's what happened here. These guys drop it over. They check it out on this computer configuration that Jerry's wife did. They go out there. They said, we got a hit off the sonar side scan in a half an hour. People have been looking for all these years. They got it in a half an hour. And then, and I just love this part of the story. Jerry goes, well, okay, let's drop it over the side of the boat and see where the camera, what the camera picks up. The camera lands right on the flying bridge. I mean, what are the odds of that happening? Boom, right on it. These guys are above, doing the dance of joy in the pilot house, as you can imagine. But, and this is what they got. Jerry was good enough to give me an image. That's the Smith. The flying bridge 100 years later. They said the water is pristine. It's crystal clear. It's dark. Obviously, you got to have it illuminated. And they brought a bunch of other pictures. Last week, I was in Duluth, and they did a PowerPoint presentation, much more adeptly, I might add, than the one I just did. But they showed slides of some of the stuff they got off of this, and it was magnificent. And it's kind of, it's sort of like closure, isn't it? Jimmy Smith went out, Jimmy Owens went out, he didn't want to go out, the Smith. And then all these years he'd been lost. Nobody knew where he was, what was going on. Now we know. And there's still a lot of questions about this 1913 storm. There's still a whole lot more stories about this 13 storm, but I'm going to be shot if I don't get off the stage here. So I'm going to close with that. It's one of those things that 100 years later we still remember. We won't forget, nor should we forget, because these guys, a lot of people lost their lives, and it's easy for time to kind of make you forget that. The Fitz was the most recent, so we remember that one. This is a long time ago, and so it's fitting, I think, what happened here this evening, where they honored those 12 boats that went down and all the men that perished on them. And I appreciate your listening to me.
Thank you, Mike. On most of the programs similar to this, we get a lot of statistics about the size of the boat and how big the waves were and how deep it was where it sank and so forth, but we seldom get such a personified explanation or description of what the crews were all about, what their families were all about, and it almost put us into the same situation, and certainly a better understanding of the experiences of being in a storm such as the Great Storm of 1913. I might add that those that are interested in Mike's book or Lee's tapes, stop by and see them as you're leaving. Also, I have frequently been asked where seamen and out afterwards. I've been told that they are often seen down at Sinbad's at the end of St. Clair, just up Jefferson Avenue a little ways, turn right, and at the end of the road there are a bunch of seamen hanging out. At this point, I would like to call for a benediction, followed by the traditional ballad by Lee of the Fitz. Reverend Woolley.
This has been a most spiritual and reflective evening. It's been an evening of remembering. It's been an evening when our hearts have been touched. Our hearts have been touched of the love of the world of mariners and their vessels. But on the other hand, we've been touched by the tragedies that have happened on the Great Lakes and the great rivers of North America. In that way, we remember with roses, as we did tonight. Flowers of great beauty, but containing stems covered with sharp and painful thorns. Tonight we remember great beauty of life, even though in the midst of that we also remember the pain and the grief of all those who never returned to their home port. But every mariner who steps on board a vessel is aware of the risk that they take. In remembering them, we honor their maritime values and traditions. We must keep those traditions alive, as we keep our memories of these sailors alive. So in some way, those who were lost to sea are in fact not lost, but are with us. In that great mystery of present life and eternal life, this night of honoring and remembering them makes them close to us in our hearts and in our minds. And this can give us peace. And it is peace that we search for in this life. So this night I pray that you may have peace and be eternally blessed. Amen.
Legend is on from the chip on down of the big lake they call Gitchigumi. The lake they said never gives up her dead when the skies in November turn gloomy. With the load of iron ore 26,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty. But that good ship and crew were a bone to be chewed when the gales of November come early. The ship was the pride of the American side, coming back from some mill in Wisconsin. And as big freighters go, she was bigger than most, with a good crew and captain well seasoned, concluding some terms with a couple of steel firms when she left full and loaded for Cleveland. And later that night when that ship's bell rang, could it be the north wind they'd been feeling? The wind in the wires made a tattletale sound as the wave broke over the railing, and every man knew as the captain did too, 'twas the witch of November come stealing. The dawn came late and the breakfast had to wait when the gales of November came slashing. When afternoon came, it poured freezing rain in the face of a hurricane west wind. When supper time came, the old cook came on deck, saying, "Fellas, it's too rough to feed ya. Then at 7 p.m. a main hatchway caved in. He cried, "Fellas, it's been good to know ya." Then the captain wired in he had water coming in, and his good ship and crew was in peril. And later that night, when the ship's lights went out of sight, came the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Does anyone know where the love of God goes when the words turn the minutes to hours? The searchers all say they'd have made Whitefish Bay if they put 15 more miles behind her. She might have split up, or she might have capsized, or she might have broke deep and took water. But all that remains are the faces and the names of the wives, the sons, and the daughters. Lake Huron Rose, Superior sings in the rooms of her ice water mansion. Old Michigan steams like a young man's dreams. Her islands and bays are for sportsmen. Then farther below, Lake Ontario takes in what Lake Erie can send her. And the iron boats go, as the mariners all know, with the gales of November, remember. In a rustic old hall in Detroit they pray at the Maritime Sailors Cathedral. And the church bell chimed until it rang 29 times for each man on the Edmund Fitzgerald. So the legend lives on from the ship on down of the big lake they call Gitchugundi. Superior, they said, never gives up her dead when the skies of November turn gloomy.
This program has been webcast throughout the internet, and many people in different states and different countries have been viewing this. And I don't always get a chance to thank all the people that are involved. The tentacles of preparation for this program reach out to Cleveland, Buffalo, Washington, D.C., Ottawa, and many other cities, and I don't often get a chance to thank all the people behind the scenes that have participated with their efforts and time, so I thank them. And I leave you with these thoughts. Yesterday is history. Today was a gift. And tomorrow is an opportunity. And thank you for coming.